judgments and decisions every day. A lot of these judgments and decisions are made in the car when we're trying to figure out where we're going to eat, or maybe professionally we're trying to consider different jobs and different offers. One example of this is when we're looking at flights. When we're looking at different flights to go to different places, we often compare prices. We often compare the information that's on these advertisements that's presented to us. However, are we given all the information?
Thanks, Ryan. I think we should think more deeply about Ryan's decision-making problem. And before we do that, I'd like to tell a story about Sherlock Holmes. There's a famous story about Sherlock Holmes called Silver Blaze. And in this story, a police inspector asked Holmes to assist him in a murder case. Okay, so the police inspector asked Holmes, is there any clue that I should pay particular attention to? And Holmes said, yes, the curious event of last night. The inspector said, wait a minute, nothing happened last night. And Holmes said, yes, that's the curious event. Okay? Holmes was able to figure out that because the victim's dog did not bark, that the murderer must have been someone known to the dog, and this was a crucial clue for solving the case. Okay? But most people are not as clever as Sherlock Holmes. Most of us would miss this important clue of the dog not barking. Even though it was a crucial clue, it's very easy to overlook really important information like this. In general, it's hard to think about non-events, like things not happening, and other types of missing information. It's difficult to think about missing information and unknown information. However, doing so can help us to make better judgments and decisions. And on the flip side, it's easy to hide information. There's lots of ways people can hide information if they're trying to persuade and influence us. One possibility is to use a one-sided message. A one-sided message presents the pros of an idea without mentioning any of the cons. The cons are hidden. Another way to hide information is using fine print, right? How many people read all the fine print before they click the agree button, right? Another way to hide information is to use fake news. Confusion can be a surprisingly powerful persuasion technique. And now, Ryan, do you want to rethink about your decision here?
Yeah. So you've convinced me that maybe I'm not considering all the information in this example that we have up here, but it's really hard to think about what they're not including. And most interestingly, I'm wondering why. Why can't we consider that information, Frank?
I'm glad you asked, Ryan. The problem here is a problem we refer to as omission neglect. Omission neglect is the idea that people are typically insensitive to missing or unknown information. And we use the term omission very broadly to refer to any type of information, missing attributes, missing options, or missing possibilities. It's a very pervasive and common decision-making bias. Okay, why does this happen? Why do we neglect omissions? And I should probably talk about neglect just a little bit more. Neglect might mean completely overlooking the information, like the inspector and the dog that did not bark, right? But neglect can also mean being unappreciative of the implications of the missing or unknown information. So we use neglect more broadly than people use it in everyday language. So why? Why do we neglect omissions? Okay. One reason is missing information is not very attention-drawing. If something doesn't capture your attention, it's not likely to have a big impact on your judgments and decisions. Okay? Missing information is not salient, it's not attention-drawing, so it's easy to overlook. It's easy to be insensitive to missing information. A second reason is tunnel vision. Right? Tunnel vision is the idea that we focus too heavily on the presented information and not enough on other information, missing or unknown information. Tunnel vision is very common. This happens all the time. We tend to focus too heavily on the information that's presented and underestimate the importance of missing information. We actually ran a study several years ago where we presented one of 3 sets of 3 attributes about cars, right? Each set was completely different. And then we asked people to rate the importance of a large set of attributes. And what we found using two different procedures, what we found in both cases is people tended to overestimate the importance of the presented information and underestimate the importance of the missing information. That's a classic example of tunnel vision. A third reason, is interference. We also find that the presented information can interfere with the ability to think about missing information. Okay. This is just part of our model. It's actually a much, much larger model. But what we find is information is typically incomplete or limited. We rarely have all the information we need to make good judgments and decisions. Okay? And typically, people are insensitive to omissions. This is the default process. There are special circumstances where people become more sensitive to omissions, and this often leads to better decisions. When people are insensitive to omissions, however, they tend to experience low uncertainty, right? It seems like you have all the information you need. Even a little information seems like a lot when we're insensitive to omissions. And the consequence of this is we tend to make big judgments based on little data. Big decisions based on little data. A classic example of this is in a study of expert decision-making, where doctors were asked to predict the life expectancy of cancer patients. Okay, so they got lots of predictions, lots of patients, and what they found was a correlation of negative 0.02 between the predictions and what actually happened. Okay, that's a lot of zeros. It's not very good, so it's not a very good prediction. And the way we would explain this is, one explanation for this finding is omission neglect. If you read the study carefully, you will see that the doctors focused too heavily on the X-rays and neglected other relevant information. Okay, so that leads us to the next issue. As decision researchers, what can we do to help people make better decisions?
Thanks, Frank. So there are ways to fight this. So the study of hidden information isn't a new one, of course. And as we look at this example, I challenge you guys to look and consider information that is not presented on this advertisement. So one way we can defeat omission neglect is following this framework that we have above here. These 4 techniques that we're about to present over they have decades of research behind them. And we'll go through each one individually. You see, everyone here has forgotten their shopping list before, right? And what happens when we forget our shopping list, right? We end up buying useless stuff, and we go home, and they're like, wait, we didn't get the milk or the bread. Like, we completely forgot the reason why we went there. And that's exactly one thing that can help us counter omission neglect, is making a list before, and this is important, before you go shopping. So in this case, when we're looking at flights, make sure you know what you want out of the flight before you look at flights. Because if you look at flights without having a list, you're going to be susceptible to only considering the information that's being presented here. So after you make your list, let's look at this thing called the distrust mindset, right? So consider what advertisers do, what their goals are. They only want to present to you the best information of their product because they know that you'll only consider that information. And so one way to combat omission neglect is to distrust the information that you're receiving from them. So when you see these advertisements, when you see these flight deals, for example, know that you're not getting all the information, and the information that you are getting is the information that they want you to see. So going on to the third one. So after you realize that the information that you're receiving may be a little sketchy, consider the information that's not presented. This is a little bit different than the distrust mindset. So considering the unknown, for example, is questioning how much information you have rather than the validity of the information that you're receiving. And so when you're considering the unknown, consider the attributes, the features that are not listed on here. Consider the things that are intangibles, like leg room. Does Delta have more leg room than Frontier? Consider the service, et cetera, et cetera. So last but not least, we can compare. We can compare products between each other. Try to use different methods of comparison. Because what you'll find is, if advertisers are only showing you the information that they want you to see, they often omit the bad information. And so if you compare across products, you're able to see that, because some may, for example, Delta may tout their customer service, whereas Frontier probably won't. So in this comparison, you'll be able to see what is omitted, and you'll be better able to consider the missing information. So these are the 4 techniques that we presented, and you can do these in order. And hopefully, if you're able to do all 4 of these, and you get presented a decision or a choice such as this one, you'll be better able to make a decision. And decisions, of course, are not restricted to products, although that is largely the domain in which we work in. This can be anything from deciding where to eat. Decide what you want to eat before you start picking out places, right? This can be, even Tinder. I'm not here to judge, but if you're comparing people, I'm going to omit information that I don't want you to see, for example. So I hope that you can use this checklist that we just went over today to help improve your decision-making process and make you guys better decision makers as a whole. Thank you.
Good job,